Hello, hello. This is DebateSensei, NFA LD edition. This is where we talk about issues that are relevant to the world of competitive NFA LD. I have a couple of experts in that community. First is Dr. Justin Kirk, the Director of Debate from University of Nebraska, Lincoln. He's also the chair of the committee for NFA LD. Thank you very much, Dr. Kirk.
Thanks for having me.
Also, we have, as always, Chad Meadows, Director of Debate from Western Kentucky University. Thank you, Chad, once again.
Excited to be here, Jared, and pumped to discuss some actual tournaments.
Yeah.
Just pontificating about what's going to happen.
So this episode is all about a recap for, well, pretty much the first major tournament, a good sort of milestone, a touch point in any NFALD season, right? This is a results for Western Kentucky. And so where do people find the results? Let's start with that.
Yeah, if anybody wants to see the results, they could check it out at tabroom.com.
It's on Tabroom? Okay.
Yeah, all the results are published there. And that includes our round robin that we had on Friday, as well as the invitational tournament that we had on Saturday and Sunday as well.
Cool. So let's start with the big news. Usually sweepstakes are like the last awards given, but in this case, why don't we start there? Who is like on a school on a college level? Who were the big winners?
So I think this tournament was really awesome because they were, I would say, at least 4 really large schools with a pretty substantial investment in LD, who you like routinely will see at the top of the results page pretty much every weekend. That did really well. And in the semifinals, all 4 of those teams had one person representing that team in the top 4.
Wow,
so
that's pretty
University
cool.
of North Texas, as always, did an incredible job. Justin's team, University of Nebraska, the returning sweepstakes champion from the last 2 seasons, did a fantastic job. Truman State University had some debaters that made it out, and also
okay.
Yeah. And then we managed
to do a lot of NPDA. I'm sorry, Truman used to do a lot of NPDA. So
yeah, back in the day.
All right, Justin, which schools do you think punched above their weight class, if you know what I mean? Who's, so like you have the large schools, but who's the small, scrappier ones?
So I really think that Truman this year has kind of been punching above their weight class. North Texas has 2 very good seniors this year, and Western Kentucky is returning a lot of folks who went deep at nationals last year. But really, Truman has a lot of young talent. They have 1 senior and a bunch of kids who have been kind of coming up for a couple of years now. And I thought they did really well this weekend and really performed kind of at a level you would expect a program like Western Kentucky or Nebraska to perform at, with a much smaller and kind of younger squad. So they're a team to definitely watch out for this year. And I think their top debater, Alicia Stout, is going to be giving everybody a run for their money on the circuit.
Alicia Stout. Okay. Any others? Truman was still one of the larger entries?
Yes. But it kind of ebbs and flows depending on who's got graduating. We had a big, really talented senior class graduate last year. And so there's a lot of programs who are having seniors that are going to kind of rise to the fore this year. And Truman's program is big, but they're still young. So that kind of creates a distance between expectations and
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Okay, like having a large entry. Sometimes the large entries, like at a novice level, do they have the same divisions in NFALD tournaments? Novice. Okay, so were there large novice teams?
I was actually going to point out a couple of novice and JV teams that did a really good job. So I think that we're struggling to mention teams beyond the 4 that I mentioned, because I think those 4 teams were all of the teams that were in the Elam debates and open.
Right.
But in JV and novice, there were a couple of teams that have either, to my knowledge, never participated in NFA LD,
Okay.
or are returning to NFA LD after a pretty long hiatus. So Marshall University won the novice division, and they were a team that had a pretty substantial NFA LD presence. I don't know, maybe a decade ago. It's been a while. And they're returning to the circuit and they're hosting a tournament. And I'm really excited about Marshall doing well. And then Appalachian State University won the junior division. I mean, they probably have done an FLD before. I just don't remember it or know a lot about it. So I was really pumped to see both of those teams with some young debaters really flexing their muscles in the JV and novice divisions too.
And are sweepstakes awards calculated and given out at a ceremony at the end of the whole thing?
Yeah, we gave out a sweepstakes award. WKU is obviously not eligible for sweepstakes because we're hosting. But I think the three that won, UNT I think was first, Nebraska was third, and
I think we're third.
Was second.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's good stuff. Hey, so Justin, I'm assuming that you are pretty adept at knowing how, like how is it weighted differently between novice and junior and senior? Is there a weighting system?
No, there's not really a weighting system. It's basically the compilation of your top performers in prelim rounds, and then all of your elim results get added together, and then you kind of collapse the three divisions and figure out who had the biggest entry across the board. It works the same way at our tournament that we host, and it works the same way at NFA Nationals. So we try to keep it pretty standardized throughout the season, so that everybody kind of knows what they're doing whenever they compete in sweeps and kind of knows what they're getting into. And so coaches like Chad and I can calculate during the tournament how we're doing compared to other teams, because you can just look at the results and say, okay, well, now we're in a good spot to compete for first or second in sweepstakes.
And are there like running rankings going on? And if some debate associations are able to do that for debaters and for schools, but some don't. What's NFA LD's stance on it?
We don't really do a ranking system. I think there's kind of an informal kind of coaches agreement about who we think the top kind of tier are. I mean, as a coach, we kind of break up tiers. Here's our kind of tier 1 debaters. These are the seniors and juniors who are competing at the highest level. Here's kind of a tier 2 set of folks that are going to be in break rounds, constantly clearing. And then tier 3, tier 4 are the newer programs, younger students that, while we still need to pay attention to and prepare for going into a tournament, oftentimes if you're taking care of research for tier 1 and tier 2, you're usually pretty well covered for most of the field.
Yeah.
So I think each team kind of has its own way of thinking about the field and breaking it up, so kind of segmenting it for preparation's sake. But there's no real kind of official ranking system until last year. And Chad can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So at the College LD Grand Prix, a tournament at the end of the season, we did a top 10 All-American award, which was it was a season-long ranking. There wasn't like a update throughout the course of the season, so it was more of like a reflection after a full season, and then ranking the top 10 after that. And last year, Nebraska's Nick Wallenberg, who ended up winning both the Grand Prix and NFA, was the top All-American. And then the second was from WKU, Andre Sway, who finaled at the Grand Prix against Nick. They had a bunch of, I think, really fun matchups last year and the previous 3 years before that. So, we'll definitely get that All-American award. I always roll around a little bit on whether or not maybe like a top 25 or a top 10 kind of like coach poll would be cool. But as of right now, there's not like a formal infrastructure.
Okay. So the Grand Prix is that like an invitational tournament, or is it still like open registration?
It's an open registration tournament. And we kind of create like a natural qualification in the sense that each team submits, I think, 4 or 5, depending on the year, into each division. So, like, I mean, if you're a team that has more than 4 or 5 debaters, you probably aren't worried too much about qualifying for a national tournament. You've probably done pretty well during the season.
Okay, cool. So let's switch gears. Now we've had a chance to see what the other team's strategies are. It's like out there. What would you say is? Let's start with the most common affirmative, or the one that's not a secret and one that everyone's got to be prepared for. You know what I mean? What would you say that was?
Easily, it was NFU, no first use nuclear policy.
Okay. Oh, really?
It's not only the most common affirmative in LD, it's the most common affirmative on the NDT circuit right now, because we have a very, very similar, almost identical topic with the NDT circuit this year. And if you look at the Wikipedia page for either of the open case lists, you'll notice that about 80% of the teams that are reading a policy affirmative are reading either no first use or some flavor of no first use of nuclear weapons.
Okay. Well, let's outline it really quick. So for people that might be, thinking about those first use or responding to it, how does the argument go in bullet pointed form?
So I can do a brief overview of the AF, and if Chad wants to do the next side, the argument basically goes that in 2022, Joe Biden passed a nuclear posture review. It's the kind of document that the government produces to say what our status of nuclear forces are, how we will respond to threats, how we will engage with adversaries and allies using our nuclear weapons as a kind of political and military tool. He refrained from instituting a policy called no first use, which is a doctrine that would prevent the United States from using nuclear weapons first in a conflict. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of debates last year about whether or not he should adopt it. So there's a lot of really great literature from the nuclear experts saying, Biden should do a no first use policy and comparing it to the other options on the table at the time. So for debate evidence, it's some of the best evidence you can research and read in debate, because it's comparative, it's recent, it contextualizes to the nuclear arsenal in a really nice way. And it's really easy to find the literature. And most of the advantages stem off of our relationships with either our allies and reassuring them, like South Korea, NATO, or our adversaries, China and Russia. France is not an adversary.
All right. And so we'll just cut that one part out. But it also kind of taps into a lot of back files, right? You get to plug all that recent stuff into all these nuclear back files with people that have a longer history of debate, because nuclear posturing, international relations are always in people's files, even if it's on impact analysis level stuff, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, Chad, you were the gauntlet was thrown. All right, and Justin threw it down. If that's the affirmative, what's the most common response, would you say?
Yeah, looking at our results, we were actually pretty successful against NFU. I actually think we only lost one NFU debate across 2 tournaments. And our negative strategy, frankly, was up the gut. It focused on a case argument, on the credibility of an NFU declaratory policy. Essentially, if the United States declared we will not use nuclear weapons first, our adversaries and even allies may not find that stance to be credible. So, we can say we're going to implement an NFU, but it doesn't mean that China or Russia necessarily believe that. And It doesn't mean that they'll make changes to their nuclear posture or strategic calculations in terms of geopolitics based on that stance. The second argument that we made that was really common, we went for it all the time, was just a sole purpose counterplan. And essentially there are 2 options for declaratory policy that Biden usually gets sort of presented with. There's the NFU, which is the most sort of firm stance that America will never use nuclear weapons first in a conflict. Right. Then there is another choice called the sole purpose stance. And basically it would be to declare that the sole purpose of the United States nuclear arsenal is to deter nuclear attacks against the United States or its allies, in a sense implying that we wouldn't use nuclear weapons first, but not specifying that as a 100% outcome of our declaratory policy. And there's like an article, I don't mind mentioning it, everyone has it. It's Panda in the Ring in 2021. It was published in War on the Rocks. And they kind of like outline a declaratory policy of sole purpose that would functionally just be a exception to a no first use policy, by which the United States would reserve the right to use nuclear weapons first if they believe that there was an imminent nuclear attack about to happen to the United States or an ally. So the scenario it outlines in the article is just, let's say that we've got intel that North Korea is about to launch a nuke against South Korea. A sole purpose wouldn't require that we wait for the bomb to detonate. We could initiate, this is getting in the weeds, but basically like nuclear counterforce against North Korea's nuclear facilities to prevent them from doing the attack to begin with. And South Korea would probably want us to do that. And so the disadvantage we go for is the assurance DA.
Oh man. So what that sets up is like the likelihood of adversaries believing first use versus the likelihood of North Korea or us getting intel that a launch was imminent before it happened. Like those become really, really small percentages to be thinking about and comparing. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, it gets really, really exacting right there. All right. Were there any critical affirmatives that made waves that came out?
Yes.
All right.
In fact, there was a critical affirmative that dealt with how fungi clean up nuclear waste and medicine, how we need to reorient our politics towards a more kind of networked or rhizomatic structure, like
rhizomatic, okay,
like fungi use, kind of spread it, like it was a critique of the way we deal with politics in many ways. And how we do politics in kind of a one-to-one relationship, and we should be much more networked about thinking about politics. And if we did that, we would have a lot more responsibility towards each other, towards the earth, and be thinking about nuclear weapons more in a holistic sense. And I found that a really interesting approach to the topic. In the rounds that I judged it was not super successful in winning debates. I mean, it did win the round in quarterfinals that I judged. But it was one of those affirmatives that oftentimes it was more the how the round went down rather than the like truth or quality of the argument.
Right.
Because I think that when I did see somebody kind of push back a little bit on that question, some of the asked kind of central arguments got pretty quickly caught up in other critical arguments that were circulating.
Right. And if it's, I don't know, I mean, sometimes it might be a little overcoaching. Or just not overcoaching, but it's like there is a really creative, different approach that one person on the team has, and they're trying to get the whole team to go for it, but they don't have the same grasp of it that the author does. You know what I mean? And so it takes a little bit of time. And so like having the first major tournament to do that, it's not really.
Or even the debater who wrote the affirmative. I mean, there was a big discrepancy between the debater who is reading this affirmative and their teammates who are reading this affirmative.
Right.
And the quality of argumentation. It was very good when I saw the person who wrote it reading it. When the other debaters on their squad were reading it, I was like, you clearly do not have kind of the same level of in-depth kind of familiarity with the literature. It's not that they weren't making good arguments or advancing the best arguments, but they just kind of didn't know exactly where all of the warranted evidence was in the evidence.
But if it's getting out on quarters, like it's got some potential. It doesn't mean you need to move on from there. Like it could just be a little bit more practice. I've seen it before, All right. Well, how about critical negs?
There's a big nuclearism argument about focusing on nuclear weapons at the expense of other forms of militarism. I know that we were reading that argument in particular. We also had a debater who was reading a nuclear numbing argument about the kind of repetition of nuclear extinction talk in debate and how that numbs us to the like real world impacts of nuclear weapons. And how we need to kind of reconsider those things. So nuclearism and the nuclear numbing were the two that I saw most of the weekend.
Right. Okay.
The ones that I would say kind of note, we had a freshman who made the quarterfinals. He was reading a critical affirmative. Their basic argument was that deterrence theory and the way that nuclear weapon policy is debated oftentimes makes a lot of assumptions about the way the mind works in an able-bodied way. And so it was an attempt to create an intervention to the normal broadcast of nuclear policy debates that sort of circulate images, metaphors, tropes of ability and disability. And it sort of like talked a lot about the way that the ballot could represent sort of like community as opposed to clashes. That was pretty successful. I think they might have been the only freshman that broke.
Okay.
It was a.
You're right.
Yeah, it was a pretty rough break. I was looking at the folks that managed to get out, and I was like, okay, so that's just like probably about 10 of the 16, maybe even more people that will be in the Octos NFA. Like,
oh, okay,
really quality. And some of the people that didn't break, I'm like, those are really good debaters.
Okay. Man, like, yeah, that's tough. If it's that early on in the season, I remember we had like a tournament at Claremont that was basically like that. How many prelim rounds? I don't even. Is it 6?
Yeah, it's 6.
Okay, cool. We had in NPDA, we had an 8-round tournament at the beginning of the season that was just ridiculously competitive, just nationally competitive, and so it sounds a lot like that. Sort of similar vein.
I would say that once nationals is over, there's only 2 dates that go on my schedule, and that would be when the topic paper is due, or when the topic vote happens, and when the round robin is for the next week. Because this is really kind of the starting post for the season, and aim for that even as far back as April.
All right. Well, let's talk about who's leading the pack after this first tournament. Let's start. Who took it all? Who took open final round?
Let's see. Round robin. WKU had the top 2 make it out of the pod. Ray Fournier and Anthony Clementi made it out. So I was pretty pumped about, obviously. And then Open
finals was Zach Jones and Ray in finals, right? And Zach won on a 2-1. So North Texas, I think, won the tournament on a 2-1 in finals, but was debating Chad's top debater.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what side was Texas on?
We were neg.
So Texas was affirmative,
yeah.
Okay, so the AF won on a 2-1. What was the strategy that won?
No, it was NFU. I mentioned that one NFU debate we lost. It was the big one.
The one that mattered the most.
Yeah, I know. I know that feeling, because I mean, there's a few people when I was debating that we were the record against each other were neck and neck, and then we hit in a final round and they win, and it happens to be the most important one. So it's it's close though. It's still on a 2-1. Okay.
Yeah, so we had debated Zach. Anthony debated Zach on the negative in the round robin, and it pretty much advanced similar arguments. We changed them up obviously as the tournament went on, but we went for sole purpose and audit assurance and got a 2-0 on that, which I was excited about. And I was thinking, okay, these docs look pretty similar, but I think they learned some new 2AR tricks. So didn't
okay.
I will mention that Zach from UNT is one of the better 2ARs I have seen in the activity in my 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Is just very good at pulling rabbits out of hats. A lot of times you're like, man, the affirmative's so far behind in this debate, and then you hear him talk in the 2AR, and you're like, actually, this debate's really close, right?
Yeah.
Every time Zach's in a debate, he's like sneaky as far as like pulling out the threads that you're like, oh, that's interesting. He's very good at strategic vision. Not to say that Ray isn't, because I saw Ray give a 2AR at this last tournament that I was like, that is just phenomenal. Both of these debaters are debaters who can turn a debate around in the last speech in a way that I just, never was able to as a debater myself. So it's very impressive.
Yeah.
And Ray was the neg in this one? I think I missed that.
Yeah, Ray was the neg.
Okay, cool. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that I thought that the semifinals had also 2 incredible debaters.
I was going to ask about that.
we mentioned Alicia Stout from Truman State University
Cool.
in the 2023 Grand Prix All-American rankings. I think she was third as a junior. So she's in many ways one of the top returning students in the season. And I honestly think like she's going to get even better as the season goes along. And then Nebraska had Zach Wallenberg, who I don't know. I thought Zach had the coolest staff of the tournament. Like, well, the coolest policy half of the tournament.
Okay.
Like, I don't know. Like, we're kind of like, especially on the policy side, we're kind of like the humorless, like up the gut. We're gonna read 5 million cards on like the most conventional arguments, and like so we read like NFU Allied Assurance to trade, which is the most basic stuff with a lot of cards. But I thought Nebraska had the coolest policy half.
Okay, you gotta let us in on this. What was this?
All right, so Zachary's AF was to take decommissioned and retired nuclear warheads and turn them into nuclear energy. Basically, a kind of atoms for peace or megatons to megawatts affirmative. But it had some very specific new reactor technologies that are just coming online. Things like natrium reactors and small modular reactors that kind of argue better against things like meltdowns or proliferation, which are typically the arguments against nuclear power, that they can melt down or make nuclear material accessible for people. And the whole argument was centered around we need to shift away from deterrence and kind of threat framing to a kind of global climate change agenda to kind of use these weapons in a productive way.
Okay. And you got to semis with that? Mm-hmm. That's very awesome. Were you on the AF in semis?
I don't remember. Were we AF or neg against y'all?
I think y'all were AF and we went for T.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes.
No, actually, I'm wrong. We went for like the counterplan.
Oh, really?
Okay.
All right. Like you did run a T on that because I could see that happening.
Yeah, I think we ran. I think T was like involved in the strategy. I don't know. At that point wasn't on the granular level as involved in the prep for those debates because I was hosting. But I kind of remember it being kind of like a T advantage counterplan deterrence DA kind of thing.
But was the RFD pretty much around the counterplan?
Yeah, I think it was. I think we won on like the counterplan DA combo with like some kind of like double bind that was like, if you don't buy the DA link, then you should vote on T kind of thing.
Got it. All right. Quarters level. Who are some notable notables at the quarters?
Yeah. Quarterfinals. So I can mention my kids. Anthony Clementi was in the quarterfinals, and then she also made it out of her pod in the round robin. So I was really pumped about her tournament. Pretty conventional stuff. NFU, disads. I don't know. Honestly, like look at Ray's wiki and hers. They also went to Northwestern the weekend before as partners in policy debate. So like they are pretty much sharing all their stuff. We mentioned
North Texas.
Nick, who was John Sims from UNT was really good. Yeah, UNT's got a lot of good debaters. I think I don't remember how they lost though. I didn't judge that debate.
John lost to Zachary in quarters. I don't remember the set of arguments because I was busy prepping or watching the Antonina v. Alicia debate. But yeah, that was Zachary and John in that debate. And John's another one of those debaters that's like really sneaky good at the last speech. And when the debate's over, you're like, wow, this is a lot closer than it seemed at the beginning.
Right.
No, all the UNT rounds, I would like look at docs and be like, I think we're in a good spot. Like we've read like a bunch of cards on this. The judges were like, I don't know, like these cards are not quite as convincing as like these final rebuttals and the analysis. I'm just like,
all right. Last thing. What's the next tournament to look out for?
I think the next major tournament is going to be UNT probably. North Texas is hosting a hybrid tournament here in a couple of weeks that I think is going to bring in most of the major programs. We're attending virtually, but I know that there's a few schools that are driving down to Denton for the weekend.
right.
We're going to Denton. I know Washburn is going to be there in person in Denton, which is a school we didn't talk about because they didn't go to our tournament because they host their own tournament the weekend before. But Washburn looks pretty loaded to me.
Okay. So that's a good thing to notice. Yeah, some teams that didn't show up, but like you got to watch out for. Washburn being one of them. Any others?
Oh heck yeah! I mean, they look like they were really kind of like poised last year, and then like pretty much brought their whole team back, most of their team back.
Okay.
I think they graduated one, maybe
two
out of about 12. So
yeah, they look great.
Wow.
Looking at their wiki, I mean, they got a diverse set of arguments. I mean, it's looking good for that. We're prepping hard for Washburn.
Okay. Okay. I'm guessing that even though they didn't show up to your tournament, there's still intel to gather on what happened at the tournament they did attend. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. This has been really illuminating. We're going to have another one of these live after the UNT tournament on October 27th. So Justin, if you're available, I'd love to have you back and discuss.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Sounds fun.
All right. Excellent. So we're going to get going, but that's Chad Meadows, Dr. Justin Kirk, and I am Jared Kavika Miller. It's a pleasure. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks.